Hey dudes, it's Llarold. Patch 11.1 is dropping today, and it's the long-awaited Undermine content patch. People have been conjecturing that this piece of content was going to be added to the game for like over 15 years now, and it's finally happening, so let's go ahead and talk about what's in the patch. And I think I'll start with what's not actually in the patch, at least not today, and that would be Season 2. It's going to be a week from now. It's the kind of usual release cycle that we've come to know and expect. All good, gives us a week to kind of get in there and experience all of the new area and the new stuff that's in the Undermine itself before we then ignore it all to do raids and Mythic Plus and Delves and PvP and so on. And that is all going to be in the game a week from now. So in terms of what's actually in the patch, the Undermine, the big new area, it's really lovely. It's great to drive around and look at, and it's here. The new quest line will start unlocking. It's not a terribly long quest line. It is something that's gated out, I think, over the course of, I believe it's 6 weeks, something that Sunset and I ran through in its entirety on the PTR in the span of maybe like an hour and a half or so. But it's kind of broken up into decent bite-sized chunks, so I think starting today that we'll be able to kind of get in there and start the process of unlocking and getting to the Undermine, and then we'll proceed from there once we've gotten there. The drive car will also be in the update today. It's something you'll be able to unlock as soon as you've gotten into the Undermine and done some of the very basic opening quest lines. You'll get this new car. We did previously put out an entire video talking about our issues with this car, and we still have some valid criticisms, I think. Most notably, just simply that you can't fly with it. You know, that's something that obviously has been kind of polarizing for people. It's something that Blizzard has been experimenting with taking away from players since Warlords of Draenor, so that's about 12 years now of this experiment of taking flying away. And I think with this expansion being the point at which they gave us dynamic flying on all of our mounts, the artists worked very hard to make that work and look good on a lot of mounts where flying maybe wouldn't have historically made as much sense with a dynamic flying system, and I think they succeeded. So it's kind of weird to, in the first patch of the game, give us this zone where we're not allowed to fly, especially after having just given us the Siren Isle where we weren't allowed to fly. It's kind of weird to be taking flying away from us that quickly. But I have to admit that this car is a lot more fun than it was in the initial testing. It really kind of drove like a Grand Theft Auto 4 car, and having had the experience of kind of getting to try it after they've made some pretty big tweaks, I do like it a lot more. It's a lot more like a Mario Kart style dune buggy. It has this ability to kind of bounce off of walls that I think makes it handle in kind of a fun way. I think if I had to really underline the positives of it, it can move very fast, and I do think it looks cool. I'll admit I'm grasping at straws a little bit here to say something nice about the car. I like flying. I think that's been the single biggest piece of feedback that I've personally have given to Blizzard over the 12 years since they started experimenting with taking flying away in Warlords of Draenor is stop this experiment, just let me fly. And the experiment continues, unfortunately. There's one line of argument that Blizzard has used, and that we've had people kind of parrot back to us as well, the idea that removing flying helps with exploration, and that's something that's never really made any sense, because I think it's just wrong. Exploration, what is exploration? It's going around and looking at stuff. That's it. Going around, looking at stuff, and enjoying doing that. That works, right? It's not a game mode that has like rules like Mythic Plus or soccer. It's more like running around in a field. And exploration is cool, but by removing the ability to travel through the Z-axis, you don't improve exploration or make it more possible. You make it harder, you make it slower, which makes sense if the goal is to slow down the rate at which players move through content, through a piece of content, to make it feel as though it is larger by taking away the ability to travel through the Z-axis. That certainly works. If taking away flying, that extra movement, makes exploration better, then wouldn't taking away the ground mount make exploration even better than that? Maybe take away our legs too, so we have to crawl. It just doesn't really track for me. It does, however, line up perfectly with the experience of getting in the shower and realizing the shampoo bottle is empty, and so you just put some water in there, shake it around, and now you kind of have shampoo for the rest of the day. That definitely lines up. But the justification we got for taking away flying in this area was that there simply wasn't room for us to fly around in, and As I said in the video talking about the drive at length, you can look at the sky and see that just isn't true. There's so much room to fly around in here. I would love to fly around in here. It would bring me a lot of joy to go explore the skies in this zone, and unfortunately, I'll be exploring the ground. And so that's pretty much it for the content that's going to be dropping today, but there are also class changes that are happening with the patch, and some pretty significant ones to tanks that I want to go over because I think there is a lot of meat on this set of bones here, starting with blood, obviously, and definitely just some good stuff for all tanks, but specifically for a couple of tanks in particular. So Death Knight is getting a 20% damage increase. All of the tanks are getting roughly 15 to 20% damage increase to their abilities. So this won't apply to like trinkets and auto attacks and stuff, but it's still a pretty significant damage increase. And the idea here is, right, that tanks haven't been keeping up with damage dealers, holding threat's been kind of a problem, and you know, I think my like the Llarold approved method for fixing threat would just simply be to make tanks threat mod be like 10,000% of DPS or whatever, just trivialize threat, because it's not like there are skills that you use that generate threat that don't do damage. But you know, this also works, right? Buffing damage is definitely Llarold approved as well, so this will definitely work. Now, what's interesting here, what's like truly interesting, I'm waving my hands around in exasperation, I guess, is that there are no other changes to blood at all. Blood evidently is fine. It's kind of interesting to look at the state of blood in both Mythic Plus, where it's like, not great at high level Mythic Plus, and absolutely godly in Raid, and say that that's fine. Not a bad thing. I love playing blood. I think in not super high level pushing Mythic Plus, blood is actually very good for, you know, just if you're doing like weekly 10, 11 completion keys, blood is great and it's super fun to play. And this just makes it more so, and then it's awesome in Raid. So for me, the way I play the game, blood is awesome. If you're a super high level Mythic Plus pusher, you don't care about blood at all, but either way, blood is definitely going to be more fun after the patch than it is before, but not in any rotationally altering way at all, and it's not going to be any less tanky, it's just going to basically be the same, but now you do more damage, which ain't bad. Demon Hunter has gotten some pretty significant reworks to like the whole class, but also to Vengeance as well. Well, reworks isn't really the right word. I would say just like damage buffs. Damage buff to Immolation Aura, damage buff to the Hunt, damage buff to your sigils. That's all great. There has been just kind of a game-wide change to a lot of the little crowd controls, things like Blinding Light and Imprison and Paralysis. A lot of those little crowd controls that if you do 1 point of damage, they instantly break. They're now supposedly only able to break if a small damage threshold is broken. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but basically if something like ticks at one time, it won't insta-break, which is good. So in terms of Demon Hunter's hero talent trees, both of them are getting a little bit of work done to them. Wounded Quarry, which is this talent over here on the right-hand side, previously would shatter out a regular soul fragment. Like if we look at the old notes for it, it would shatter out a regular soul fragment, which gives you a damage bonus. That was changed to just be like a regular lesser soul fragment, so it's not quite as big of a damage value talent. You know, still good though. There were some issues with it, like not scaling, and there was also a bug where Thrill of the Flight was double dipping, and so that is being removed. That's being fixed. So, you know, RIP Havoc Demon Hunter, I suppose. You know, it is what it is. Eldrazi Reaver, it's fine. It's obviously very good in the right situations. Not really as fun to me as Felsguard. Oddly, even though Felsguard seems a lot more passive, and I think it actually winds up being more fun. And Demon Surge is getting a pretty big damage bonus, 65% increase to damage, and then also like a big damage bonus for Immolation Aura from Flamebound, which is this talent right here, this choice node here where you get Student of Suffering. Flamebound has obviously gotten a pretty big buff, and then Student of Suffering also getting a nerf at the same time. Along with the increase to Immolation Aura, I think this means there's probably a shift over to Flamebound being kind of the choice there in that setup, which is, you know, fine. More damage is always good, especially for Vengeance. That's going to be really appealing. Vengeance, just like Blood and just like Bear Druid, has gotten across the board 20% ability damage increase, which is pretty good. There are a couple of other small nerfs that have happened here, though, like Burning Blood and Fiery Demise are both slightly nerfed. Burning Blood being this talent here, and Fiery Demise being this 2-point talent here that turns your Fiery Brand from being a really good shield wall style talent into both a shield wall and a pretty big offensive cooldown. Both of those have gotten a pretty decent sized nerf to them, which kind of stinks a little bit. Basically, they're shifting some of that burst damage potential into just like more generic damage potential with Immolation Aura and Sigil of Spite and Flame going up. But then also more burst damage. I mean, Sigil of Spite is a burst damage skill. The Hunt is a burst damage skill. So it's kind of just like moving deck chairs around on the, what's a ship that didn't sink? I don't know, Queen Mary. Right? Like that's the state of Vengeance Demon Hunter. It's definitely not a sinking ship, but they're just kind of moving stuff around a little bit on it. Cycle of Binding has gotten slightly reworked. I think the spirit is still there. I think it's like maybe a little bit more cohesive of an idea now. Once upon a time, it was an Azurite armor bonus, and then it was converted into a talent and made it so that like all of your sigils would reduce the cooldown of all the rest of your sigils, including the one that triggered it, which is like pretty cool. Then it was changed to only work with Sigil of Flame, and now it's kind of been worked around the other way, where Sigil of Flame hitting enemies will then reduce the cooldown of all of your sigils, including itself. I think that's pretty good. It's not insane like it was throughout Dragonflight or, in the past, but it's okay. Then there's also just a really good bit of quality of life here. Fallout, this talent over here, which gives you Immolation Aura, the Immolation Aura initial hit, chance to trigger like soul fragments bursting out of enemies. That's been juiced, so it's always guaranteed to give you at least one. That's good. And then Feed the Demon, which is this talent right here in the kind of lower middle, formerly a 2-pointer. It's a really good bonus. Giving you cooldown reduction on Demon Spikes really helps with Demon Spikes uptime, especially when combined with extended spikes. But it was a 2-pointer. It was just too expensive for what it did. They've kind of hedged their bets. They've made it be not as good as both points for the price of one, but better than just 1 point at a time. They kind of split it right down the middle and just made it into a 1-pointer, and that's great because there's some really valuable talents underneath it, and now you're able to much more easily access them. So I think that's really good for Vengeance. They did then once again kind of compensated for Demon Surge getting the big damage buff for like all Felscarred Demon Hunters, and then they nerfed that for Vengeance a little bit. Okay, fine, but it is what it is. Ultimately, I do think Vengeance is coming through the patch buff. They're probably the most buffed of any of the 6 tanks, but I don't feel like this is an overwhelming set of buffs where you go like, I gotta have that Demon Hunter. I think it's pretty good. If you liked Demon Hunter before, you're gonna like it afterward. If you didn't like Demon Hunter before, you're probably still not going to. Druid has also gotten a lot of changes. They've actually gotten a larger total number of changes than Demon Hunter. I don't know that they'll necessarily change the feel of the class all that much, but just to kind of touch on them, the class tree has gotten a pretty significant reshuffling, I think is the best way to think about it. As you can see, the bottom section of the tree is like oriented quite differently from how it was before. Also, Rake now leads over to Grievous Wounds. It does give you 10% more thrash damage, so I think there's a justification to take that even as a Loon's Chosen. Certainly if you're going to play Druid of the Claw and do any kind of cat weaving, you're obviously going to want to take that because that's a pretty big damage increase. But otherwise, a lot of the stuff is still kind of the same feel. It's maybe a little easier to take Remove Corruption now in the current layout of the tree. There's also a new talent here called Essena's Renewal, which you can take instead of Renewal, and it gives you this sort of reactive heal. Whenever you take a relatively large hit, you instantly heal for 10% of your health on a 30-second cooldown. I think that's pretty good, especially while tanking. Probably not as good as the amount of control that you get out of Renewal, but it's certainly an option you can go after. I think it's also a little easier to take Innervate now. And then there's a new talent called Symbiotic Relationship. You can hook up with an ally, and then all of your self-healing will also hit that person for 10%, and you can heal them for a little bit more. If you want to throw heals around with like Dream of Cenarius, for example, you could do that. So that's an option. I think that's a pretty cool talent. I don't know how much use it'll actually wind up getting, but it's definitely a cool idea. Maybe some just more basic stuff like more Moonfire damage out of Lure of the Grove is maybe a little more appealing. Maul damage out of Instinct of the Claw seems okay. Circle of the Heavens or Circle of the Wild is a little choice node down here that just gives you a bit more damage. A little boring, but I'm never going to say no to damage, especially with Druid's damage having been just so dumpster throughout all of Season 1 of the War Within. Definitely any way to get more damage is appreciated. And then over here on the left-hand side, it's just I think a little bit easier to get to Feline Swiftness than it was in the past. And obviously that's a good thing. Ultimately, I don't think this is really gonna if you didn't love Bear Druid before, I don't think you're gonna suddenly love Bear Druid now. But if you did like Bear Druid before, and I do, I think it's like something kind of new to play around with and maybe go ooh and ah at for a little bit, and then ultimately kind of settle into how things are. So Bear Druid has also gotten some spec-specific changes. Maybe the most notable here is that their ability damages have been increased by 26%, and then Moonfire and Mangle have also just gotten additional increases on top of that. Maul and Raze have actually gotten nerfed, and then Raze, once again, is replacing Maul entirely, but Raze has finally gotten the rework that I've been asking for a long time. As you can see, it now deals effectively double damage to your primary target and then kind of splash damage to everything around it, which is exactly how I've wanted Raze to work forever, and it finally does, and so I think that's pretty great. Layered Main has actually been removed. That's fine. I've never really thought that was a great talent, and it's been replaced with Ursol's Warding, which gives you a little bit of extra magic damage reduction from your armor. This is a pretty low amount, so it's something that could help. I think in a lot of cases you might be easier off justifying just getting like more bark skin and survival instincts uptime from survival of the fittest if you're going to path that direction, but maybe if you're in a situation where you're taking a lot of sustained spell damage, it'll do something. All right, with that being said about Druid, now I'd like to just mention Monk, but first I'm just going to scroll by Hunter. I'm just going to scroll by Hunter here real quick, and you can see there's quite a lot happening to Hunter. And then I'm going to scroll by Mage. Oh my god, look at how long this is taking. All right, so now we're here at Brewmaster. 15% more ability damage, which is less than the 3 tanks we've talked about so far. Invoke Nizao now absorbs a little bit more staggered damage while he's active, so instead of being like 10% damage reduction while he's up, he's like 15. Not a big deal. He does, instead of 0 damage, he does 0 times 1.22, so that's still 0. And Purified Chi now stacks up to 6 times instead of 10 and is a good bit stronger, so it's a little bit easier to get your Celestial Brew stacks kind of maxed out just slightly quicker. I don't think that any of these 4 changes is going to have any impact on Brewmaster Monk and Mythic Plus at all. I think it is still categorically the worst tank in Mythic Plus, especially with the changes that have happened to some of the other underperforming tanks like Bear Druid. I think they're going to pull away and leave Brewmaster just absolutely eating their dust. And that's a real bummer. And that is unfortunately all that there is for Monk. I actually think that this is kind of going to even hurt Monk in Raid, even though this is technically a buff. I think that the buffs that have happened to other classes or the changes, the lack of nerfs to DK, just simply drag them even further away from Brewmaster, especially with their upcoming tier set bonus being really not very appealing. All right, now let's hit on Prop Paladin. Another 15% damage increase. You know, kind of a punishment for doing a lot of damage in Mythic Plus. I think that's justifiable. They've been like 20 or 30% ahead of the number 2 tank in Mythic Plus, which was Brewmaster, so that makes sense. Strength and Adversity, which is an insanely powerful talent. I will just point that out here in the talent tree. It is this choice node down here. It gives you 25% parry chance basically all the time in AoE, which is crazy. You know, you look at Dancing Rune Weapon, a major defensive cooldown is 40% parry chance. Prop Pally's been able to get that along with their insane block chance and Shield of the Righteous armor and consecration damage reduction and so on, and just have permanent uptime on it. So that's been dropped from 25 to 15. Still insanely strong. Uther's Council has been over here a 1-point talent that gave you 30% CDR on Lay on Hands, Divine Shield, Blessing of Protection, and Spell Warding. Really large amount of cooldown reduction on all of those. That has been cut down to only 15%. That's actually a pretty significant nerf on all of those. It was shaving like 90 seconds or so off of the cooldown of some of the skills like Divine Shield. Now it's going to go down to 45 seconds. Still not bad. Maybe it won't get taken in some of the situations, but the thing with Prop Pally is there are so many other good talent options available, things like Moment of Glory that you could just sub in its place, so that I don't think that they're going to lose a step there. And then Refining Fire, which is just talent here that just gave you a big extra amount of damage on top of all of your Avenger Shield damage. That has been nerfed. You know, that's going to hurt the damage output a little bit, but ultimately I still think Prop Pally had so much like runway to lose compared to all of the other tanks when it came to dealing damage in Mythic Plus, that this really isn't a big problem. Templar has also gotten a slight buff. Just to look at the Templar talents here, Undisputed Ruling previously was just kind of a nothing talent. Now it makes it so that it grants you Shield of the Righteous and Consecration and gives you a 12% haste buff. And that's pretty good. Previously, if I remember correctly, it basically just like cast Judgment on the target for you. Yeah, it judged them and gave you 12% haste. Well, you know, applying Judgment without actually doing the damage of Judgment, that basically was worthless. But a free Shield of the Righteous and a Consecration, I'll take that. That's not bad. Ultimately, I think just like with pretty much all the takes we've seen so far. If you liked Prop Paladin before, you're gonna love it after the patch. You're gonna like it just as much. If you didn't love it before, what's wrong with you? It's really great and really fun. You should love it. All right, I'm gonna go on to Warrior now, but just again, remember how long the Monk section was as I scroll through the enhancement section. I'm just scrolling through the enhancement section. Alrighty, and here we are at Warrior. So Warrior's gotten a pretty significant set of changes to their class tree and to just the kind of general play style. A lot of rage tuning has gone on. Ability damage has been increased by 26%, so kind of like with Bear Druid. I didn't think Warrior's damage was particularly terrible throughout Season 1 in Mythic Plus, so this is actually a pretty significant buff. Shield Slam has also seen the damage go up quite a lot. Execute's been buffed as well. There are some other changes as well. Brace for Impact, this talent over here that gave you a stacking Shield Slam damage and block value increase. This took like 5 Shield Slams to stack up. Took a little while. Now it's only 3, so that's a pretty good change. Just less time spent ramping. Punish has also seen a bit of a damage reduction increase. It's 3% per stack instead of 2, so a little bit more raw damage reduction for Warrior. And the reason for that is that the reset chance on Shield Slam has been reduced from 30% on all of your skills to 25%. However, the reset chance from Devastate and Devastator is now 25% as opposed to 20%, which it was before. So the Shield Slam reset chance is still relatively similar to what it was. A lot of the rage generation throughout the tree, just to kind of summarize a lot of these changes, a lot of rage generation has been reduced, but Ignore Pain is now stronger than it was. So generally speaking, Warrior feels pretty similar to how it did before, except that it deals quite a lot more damage. There have been some changes to Barbaric Training, for example, no longer has the downside of making your revenge cost more. Your revenge just hits a lot harder now. And then Frothing Berserker has also seen a pretty significant buff. That's this talent here. It gives you a 20% chance to refund 50% of the rage spent on revenge. So you're able to hit revenge quite a bit more. And it's just kind of a more valuable GCD. It's hitting 25% harder because of Barbaric Training. It's refunding more often, and it just feels a lot better to press. Prot Warrior is definitely going to be a much harder hitting tank in the coming patch than it was before. I think this probably, if I had to look at all of the tanks, I think Prot Warrior is probably the biggest winner, but they had kind of the most ground to make up, so I don't necessarily think that they've jumped to number 1, except maybe in the DPS charts, but I think tank DPS charts is not the metric that you want to use when evaluating what tank you want to play. The issue for Prot Warrior is just simply that the group utility still isn't great, and all they're really bringing to the table is a lot of tankiness, which is great, but other tanks such as Bear Druid and Prot Pally also have that. DK, for what it's worth, except in high-level Mythic Plus, also has super amounts of tankiness. And, damage is great, but yeah, if there's no group utility, that's still kind of a limitation. So I think Prot Warrior is going to be good, but not great in the coming season in Mythic Plus, and not even really all that good in Raid, but definitely very fun to play because it is going to blast. There are some other small changes happening as well. Colossus Smash is going to give you a little bit more rage generation out of practice strikes on your Shield Slam, but then Execute's going to have a little bit less of a role in interacting with Colossal Might, the big damage stacking bonus. I actually don't really care for that in the Execute range. That actually kind of is a bit of a bummer of a change. And then Mountain Thane is getting 2 little buffs here for protection. Thunder Blast, this talent here that is a really great feeling talent, turns your Thunderclap into Thunder Blast, getting a little bit of a damage increase. And then the occasional free avatar procs that you get out of Avatar of the Storm, instead of lasting for 4 seconds, feels pretty short. They're now going to last for 6. That's a little bit better. Not a huge deal. You're still maybe only getting one of these every minute or so. So not really a huge deal, but it's free real estate, right? Prot Warrior is definitely getting a pretty big damage increase with the patch, so nothing to complain about there. In fact, I would say of all of the tanks, the only one that I really have anything to complain about is Monk, and ultimately I think my complaints about the state of Monk are why I've decided to abandon it in the upcoming patch and just swear my loyalty to Protection Paladin. And unfortunately, the real big takeaway I have here is that I'm really not even upset about it. Prop Paladin is such a great addition to any group that it's a part of. It has so much group utility. The damage is obviously amazing in Mythic Plus. Even with any sort of balancing that's happening to other tanks, Prop Pally is still very much holding their own and just really a joy to play. And I really can't make that same comparison about Brewmaster. I feel like Brewmaster needs so much more damage reduction in Mythic Plus, and all they've really gotten is a tiny bit of a buff to Nizal and the like rate at which they acquire Celestial Brew bonus. Like, it just really feel like Blizzard missed the boat on Monk, and it's a shame because I feel like they didn't miss on pretty much any of the other tanks. I would be excited if I were playing any other tank going into this patch, except for Brewmaster. Well, that pretty much covers it. Patch 11.1 is coming out later today, and despite my problems with Monk and being unable to fly in the new zone, I am excited about the upcoming season. It's going to be a lot of fun. Paladin really has become my favorite tank in recent times, and I am looking forward to playing a lot more of it. We're really looking forward to the new season, getting a chance to play some of the new dungeons and give feedback on them, so look out for that in the future. Alright, that's it. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more like it, and if you want to support us even further, consider becoming a channel member. Thanks for watching. Bye.